Queen Camilla was essentially informed by Prince William that she did not have the last word about the royal jewelry vault.
Once again, the Queen Consort surprises us, but not in a good way. Prince William had prepared for political criticism, family tension, and palace scandal. He had not prepared for this. Inside Parliament, a sealed records review was opened, identifying 3 royal decree entries with altered signatures, changed authorization dates, and irregular seal records directly connected to Queen Camilla's private office. William read the summary twice, then stopped moving. This was no ordinary family dispute. It struck at the crown itself. Like this video if you want more royal deep dives, and subscribe to Royal Expose so you never miss what happens next. Because trust me, this story is far from over. Parliament's startling discovery of Camilla's forged decree records. The British monarchy operates on a foundation of meticulous and unquestionable documentation, a system centuries in the making, designed to ensure that the sovereign's will is accurately recorded, verified, and executed with precision. A royal decree is not just a simple internal memo or a casual request. It is a formal, legally binding order that carries the monarch's direct and personal authority. When a decree is finalized, it influences decisions regarding private royal collections, ceremonial permissions, household appointments, and the extensive network of crown operations. Thus, when the sealed parliamentary summary arrived at Windsor Castle, it was more than just unsettling news. It represented the gravity of a significant constitutional crisis. Parliament's undisclosed examination of royal authorization logs had uncovered an anomaly that sent ripples of fear through the sovereign's legal secretariat. 3 specific decree entries, all connected to Queen Camilla's private office, were identified as irregular. However, irregular was merely a polite term for something far more alarming. The records revealed altered signatures, post-dated authorization stamps, and seal logs that did not correspond with King Charles's official engagements. As these findings were discreetly circulated among the royal household's top legal advisors, the unsettling reality began to take shape. The investigation had not merely identified a harmless filing error or a misunderstood verbal directive. It uncovered a calculated pattern. These entries did not emerge during a one-off administrative blunder. Instead, they were systematically distributed across several months, indicating a degree of planning, access, and confidence that suggested no one would dare to scrutinize the records closely. Understanding this discovery requires insight into how power flows within the palace. The Queen Consort's office holds considerable delegated authority, managing her schedule, patronages, and staff. However, it lacks the constitutional power to override the sovereign's central administration or to alter terms of royal collections without explicit documented consent from King Charles himself. The parliamentary review highlighted that these 3 decrees had effectively transferred temporary control over sensitive royal collection decisions directly to Camilla's household. The documentation claimed to have sovereign approval, yet the conflicting digital and physical logs painted a different picture. On the exact evenings it was alleged that these authorizations were granted, King Charles was verifiably away from the palace on official duties. The realization that an office operating under the Queen Consort's name had purportedly used the monarch's authority without his physical presence or verifiable consent sent shockwaves through the constitutional experts reviewing the case. If Parliament's assessment was correct, it meant that the very integrity of the royal signature had been compromised from within the nation's most secure household. Decisions had already been made, permissions granted, and assets transferred based on forged authority. This discovery was not just a crisis of trust. It was an unprecedented breach of the institutional firewall separating the monarch's personal will from the ambitions of those operating within the palace. The records had been exposed, the mechanism of deception laid bare, and the royal family found itself teetering on the brink of a profound crisis. Prince William completely frozen as the constitutional crisis deepens. Inside his private study in Windsor, Prince William lowered the heavy parliamentary summary onto his polished mahogany desk, keeping his hand firmly pressed against its leather cover. He remained silent and motionless. Across the room, Catherine observed him with the quiet, perceptive intensity that had come to define their partnership. The Prince of Wales seemed completely frozen, caught in a paralyzing dilemma between being a protective son and the future king of the United Kingdom. The documents before him represented a nightmare scenario he had never anticipated. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for external threats to the monarchy, such as Republican movements, hostile media investigations, and shifting public opinion. However, he had not been prepared for the catastrophic revelation that his stepmother's office might be operating a shadow authority behind his father's back. As William processed the details of the forged decrees, the political danger transformed into a deeply personal anguish. The parliamentary records outlined the nature of the altered documents, and one specific entry disturbed him more than the others. According to the supporting material attached to the review, one of the disputed decrees had directly affected access to and ceremonial permissions regarding objects associated with Princess Diana's historical collection. This single detail completely changed William's reaction. Initially, his concern had been strictly constitutional, focused on the survival and integrity of the crown. Now it became intensely personal. The items tied to his late mother were not mere assets or museum pieces to him. They carried memory, grief, and a complicated history that the royal family had never fully escaped. The thought that someone within Camilla's inner circle had bypassed sovereign authorization to manipulate decisions regarding Diana's legacy felt like a deliberate and devastating violation. When Catherine finally voiced the question, hanging heavily in the silence, "Did Charles know?" William looked toward her, the full weight of his future reign evident in his eyes. He hesitated to answer immediately, as his fears were no longer limited to front-page headlines or parliamentary outrage. Now they extended to the possibility of his father discovering this troubling situation. William understood how much trust King Charles had placed in Camilla over the years. He had witnessed the agonizing, years-long effort to rebuild her public image, secure her acceptance within the family, and ultimately crown her as Queen Consort. If that foundational trust were to crumble now under the undeniable weight of forged royal decrees, the psychological impact on the king would be catastrophic. However, as the heir to the throne, William bore a burden that transcended family loyalty. He was expected to protect the absolute stability of the monarchy he would one day lead. Every decision he made in the coming hours would be judged against the kind of king he aspired to become. He could not bury the parliamentary report to spare his father a broken heart, nor could he allow false authority to go unchallenged simply because confronting it could spark a global scandal. He told Catherine in a voice barely above a whisper that his father could not face this news alone. The crisis had escalated into a defining moment for the Prince of Wales, compelling him to realize that to defend the institution, he might have to help dismantle the very piece his father had spent a lifetime trying to build. Princess Anne's ignored warning and the missing palace registry logs. The unfolding disaster might have remained an abstract mystery if not for the decisive intervention of the Princess Royal. As the crisis deepened behind the closed doors of Windsor, Princess Anne entered the narrative with a documented private account that would transform the parliamentary findings from a mere question of administrative error into a definitive case of deliberate cover-up. Months before the sealed review ever exposed the irregular records, there was one critical evening when the royal family nearly halted the deception in its tracks. The incident took place during a private Windsor heritage reception, a gathering focused on the care and ceremonial use of historic royal objects. King Charles was away on a separate engagement, and William and Catherine had already departed for the evening, leaving Anne as the most senior family member present when a late-night authorization unexpectedly arrived at the household office. The paperwork included broad language that transferred temporary control over specific royal collection decisions directly to Camilla's staff. Anne read the decree once and immediately halted its execution. Her suspicion did not arise from petty jealousy or lingering family rivalry. It stemmed from a lifetime of service and an intimate knowledge of her brother's habits. The wording of the decree struck her as fundamentally wrong. It felt too broad, too clean, and altogether too convenient. More importantly, Charles did not authorize structural changes in that specific language without demanding multiple layers of direct review. Anne firmly placed her finger on the sovereign authorization line and explicitly told the waiting aides that she would not endorse or acknowledge the document until Charles personally confirmed it. Later that same night, Camilla confronted her. The Queen Consort insisted that the change was merely administrative and accused Anne of turning a routine matter of household management into an unnecessary personal question of trust. However, the Princess Royal refused to soften her position. Staring her sister-in-law down after midnight, Anne issued a chilling ultimatum. If Charles truly approved this change, he would have to tell her himself. Camilla remained silent for several seconds before turning and leaving the room, leaving the central question unanswered. The real danger, however, revealed itself only when Parliament's digital forensics team recovered the finalized internal logs from that night. When investigators searched the official registry for Anne's formal objection, they found nothing. The warning had been completely erased. Instead, the permanent entry stated that the decree had been received and processed without challenge. That single fabricated phrase transformed an uncomfortable family suspicion into something significantly darker. When the parliamentary team dug deeper into the palace's backup servers, they discovered a hidden digital timestamp. This record showed that the official registry had been manually modified almost 40 minutes after Anne had first lodged her objection. Furthermore, the access code used to erase the Princess Royal's warning from the historical record belonged to a senior household official who worked directly in Camilla's private office. An ordinary aide could not have executed such a precise digital alteration. It required senior-level clearance. Anne's ignored warning was no longer just a story of old family friction. It was verifiable evidence that someone had actively rewritten the events of the night to manufacture consent, proving that a coordinated high-level cover-up protected the forgery. King Charles faces the ultimate betrayal inside his own royal palace. In a distant, quiet wing of the palace, King Charles sat alone with a parliamentary brief resting on the table before him. He had removed his reading glasses, placing them with slow, deliberate care beside a damning file. When his private secretary gently inquired whether Prince William had received the full, unredacted version of the report, the king did not raise his voice. This quiet restraint made the moment feel infinitely heavier. Charles had spent decades preparing to defend the crown from public controversy, political interference, and external attacks. Still, nothing could have prepared him for a threat engineered within the household he trusted most. When the answer came back that his son had indeed seen everything, Charles closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and remained silent. Elsewhere in the palace, Camilla waited anxiously. She refused every suggestion from her frantic aides. She did not want talking points, legal reassurance, or public relations strategies. She desperately wanted Charles. Yet the longer the king failed to summon her, the more her frustration turned into a deep-rooted fear. The silence radiating from the king's study was more devastating than any explosive argument could have been. Charles was forced to endure the ultimate betrayal, the realization that his own authority, the sacred trust of his sovereign signature, had been weaponized by the office of the woman he loved. As the sovereign's legal secretariat walked him through the forensic evidence, Charles faced the agonizing process of re-authenticating his own life. The legal advisors explained that a royal decree carries authority only if the monarch personally approves it. If that approval had been copied, stretched, or entirely fabricated, every decision based on that document could legally collapse. Charles turned to the first disputed decree and read the language slowly. He recognized the broad, sweeping transfer of discretion to Camilla's household office, a transfer he unequivocally would never have approved without a rigorous secondary review. Sitting before his advisors, he read the fabricated sentence again, the reality of the deception washing over him. The thought that his signature had been treated as a convenient tool, reconstructed whenever someone in his wife's office deemed it necessary, disturbed him on a profound existential level. For the king, sovereign approval was meant to be personal, deliberate, and unmistakable. Discovering that it had been manufactured in the shadows deeply humiliated him as a monarch, but devastated him as a husband. Charles understood that accepting the parliamentary findings and declaring the records irregular would publicly humiliate Camilla, exposing her inner circle to unprecedented constitutional scrutiny. However, refusing to accept the findings would leave the crown defending an authority that never legitimately existed, ultimately destroying the institution's integrity forever. Charles was trapped in the most painful paradox of his reign. He had fought the establishment, the public, and his own family for decades to ensure Camilla's place by his side, demanding that the world respect her as queen consort. Now, staring at the manipulated access logs and the erased objections of his own sister, Charles realized that protecting his wife's comfort would mean sacrificing the truth of the monarchy. In the crushing isolation of his study, the king understood that the greatest threat they faced was no longer the outside world. It was the devastating uncertainty over what she had known and what he could ever believe again. The unprecedented suspension of the queen consort's delegated powers. The decision, when it finally arrived, was swift, brutal, and without precedent. Acknowledging that the disputed royal authority could not endure merely because confronting it was emotionally painful, King Charles chose the only constitutional path available to him to preserve the integrity of the crown. With a heavy hand and a resolute expression, the monarch picked up his fountain pen, hesitated for only a moment, and signed a formal restriction order. He mandated that all 3 disputed decrees be frozen entirely, immediately suspending all authorities, permissions, and access rights created by them until a full independent investigation was completed. However, the king did not merely freeze the specific documents. He took the extraordinary step of stripping Camilla's private household of its authority to process decrees independently. This meant that all responsibility for the contested decisions was aggressively transferred back to Charles's central household administration. From that point on, her team could no longer act under the expansive powers they had utilized for months. Any future permissions would require rigorous, documented approval directly through the king's own verification system. By the time the queen consort was informed of what Charles had done, her world had fundamentally changed, and the first doors of her palace influence were beginning to close. Camilla received the news without shouting, making the silence in her office almost unbearable. Staff members were immediately ordered to preserve all access records, correspondence logs, and internal schedules for forensic review. However, the detail that struck the deepest and most agonizing blow was the revelation that Charles had signed the sweeping restriction without first consulting her. She had anticipated immense anger and prepared for incredibly difficult questions, but she had not expected to be entirely bypassed. She perceived his silence as a definitive judgment delivered before any final investigative findings had been reached. Sitting alone at her desk, staring at an office that suddenly no longer felt hers entirely, the queen consort understood the practical and emotional message immediately. Nothing her staff had done under those powers would ever be accepted without extreme suspicion again. When the sun rose over London, the crisis no longer belonged to the private drawing rooms of Windsor. It had become a public issue for Britain. The morning newspapers carried the same explosive constitutional theme. Royal authority had been forged within the very machinery designed to protect it. Broadcasters abandoned their standard programming for live, continuous constitutional analysis, while crowds gathered silently outside Buckingham Palace, watching the institutional earthquake unfold on their screens. In a final, subdued family meeting, Charles placed the newly authenticated and corrected registry on the table. Princess Anne's original defiant objection had been formally restored to the permanent historical record, exactly where it belonged. William closed the file, his resolve strengthened. The senior official responsible for the digital alterations was permanently dismissed from royal service. The false decrees were annulled, and the queen consort's independent authority had been severely curtailed. As the future king looked at his family, he recognized the lasting verdict of the scandal. The British monarchy can survive embarrassment, bitter division, and painful public truths. But the moment it allows its authority to be forged in the shadows, it risks losing the one fundamental element no crown can rule without: absolute trust.